All right, good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar, buying or selling a business, the 9 stages for all transactions. We have Don Hobbs and Dave Harris here with us from Front Range Business. Please put any questions you have in the chat and we'll answer them, or you can save them for the end during our Q&A. You will be receiving a recording of this webinar after the presentation, and you can find the PowerPoint in your client dashboard. I'll drop that link in the chat for you so you can pull that up. I'll also be putting a few other links in the chat. You can check these out for a list of our upcoming classes, workshops, program, and networking events, as well as a link to sign up for free confidential one-on-one business consulting. And you can check out our network of consultants. Larimer's network has over 40 consultants. We're one of the largest in the state, and consulting is always free and confidential. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, email me. I'll put my email in the chat as well. Otherwise, thank you. Hope you enjoy the webinar, and I will hand it over to Don.
Great. Well, thank you, Sally. And let me welcome everybody to today's program. We always appreciate the chance to share our experience as brokers in buying and selling businesses through the Larimer County SBDC's community of members and guests. So thank you to all the attendees, as well as to Larimer County SBDC. I'll just do a quick bio. I'm in my 51st year, maybe 52nd, of living in Colorado. That's been primarily in the Boulder County area. I'm in my 8th year as a broker with Front Range Business. Previously, I sold 3 of my own businesses. I also had stints in the corporate world. So now as a broker with 8 years, I've interacted with hundreds of sellers, looked at their businesses. I've handled inquiries from thousands of buyers. And I think what we've tried to do here is put together a program that's really a distillation of those experiences. So, but let me start first. Let me just add, Dave Harris is co-presenting today. So Dave, maybe you can give a quick bio on yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My background actually is similar to Don's, though I may have been rooted in corporate America for a longer period of time. And so many years in corporate America and tech, actually buying and selling businesses, part of that. Then I've sold a couple of my businesses. In fact, Don sold the last one, which was an adventure travel business out of, actually, we were based in Lafayette. So I think it's just it's a nice mesh of things that you need to know to kind of be successful as a business broker. After Don sold my business, he also sold me on joining Front Range. So here I am. So back to my lovely assistant, Don.
Thank you. So I will just add, Dave has historically, since he's been a broker with us, somehow, some way, he winds up with the more unusual business listings. And as a result, he's had to sort of bring a great degree of creativity to his selling program, because an unusual business often takes an unusual strategy to get it sold, as he knows well, and we all have learned. Okay, so 90 minutes today. We're going to cover 9 steps, and we'll be moving pretty quickly. So that's the warning, and we'll get started with the program, and let's just do a quick introduction. So we have combined both the buyer and the seller perspective in this program. I think that's a really valuable way to do it. And the reason I think that's a valuable way to do it is because the more buyers and sellers understand each side's perspective, the better we can make the transaction go. If they really don't understand what the other person's going through, it's just hard to get the two parties to really come together. Also, the primary goal today is to introduce, let me emphasize that, introduce what lies ahead. This can't be a full soup to nuts how-to training seminar that you walk away with understanding everything you need to do to sell your business or buy a business, but we'll introduce you to what lies ahead on the roadmap so you can have a good idea of what you can expect. What are the 9 steps based on? They're based on the commonalities that we've learned from selling and looking at many businesses, recognizing that every sale's different. Each one has its own circumstances. So it's never really perfect or linear as the slides might suggest that we put up on the screen. But the reality is these steps that you'll see us go through today are really common to every transaction. So building on that point about the lack of perfection or linear, there's a lot of moving parts. And, you know, buyers, sellers, it's really good to hear the message up front and appreciate that flexibility, compromise are always going to be required to get past sticking points. There will always be sticking points. Buyers are going to see the transaction one way, sellers are going to see it another way, and there's other influencers that we're going to talk about, and we've got to figure out how to get through those, or else buyers never buy and sellers never sell, and that doesn't meet anybody's objectives. So as you'll come to see what's involved as we go through the 9 steps, you'll see why we encourage you to plan on a minimum of 4 months to sell your business or to acquire a business, and why a year is not uncommon. It's a common time frame for getting a business bought or sold. So one last point, it's not in the slide. We always talk about buyer and seller. You'll be looking at this as buyer and seller. Just remember that throughout the process, there is a broker, typically. Certainly, if we're involved in the transaction, there's a broker. And the broker is helping to drive this transaction to the finish line. And they're providing lots of service, lots of resource things, lots of advice and counsel. I always tell sellers, you're going to spend a lot of time with me at the front end, but once this business is in the market, as a broker, I'm going to be spending a lot more time with the buyers than I do with you. And that's what it takes to get a transaction done. So let's go to step 1. And we're going to start with the seller's view of step 1, which is really the seller coming to terms with the question of, am I ready to sell? And so, you know, if a seller is letting go of their business, it's very likely something has changed in their world. We don't see many sellers who are in their prime, whose businesses are running great, who don't have anything that's changed in their life or in their industry or in their company or whatever. We don't see those people selling. What we see is people who have experienced some kind of a change. Now, what is that? You could have a spouse maybe is being transferred out of state, and you want to sell your business to keep your family together. Maybe you're coming up on retirement age, or you're past retirement age and you're really slowing down and you need to sell. Maybe you recognize that while your business is successful, it takes more capital to keep it going, to expand it than you have. Those are all, reasons. There are some reasons that are less positive. You have illness, potentially. You can have a divorce. There are other things that maybe are going to cause a business to have to be sold. But again, something has changed. And the other thing you want to move on to is, what is it that I'm going to do after this sale? If a seller can answer the question comfortably, I know what I'm going to do after the sale. I'm going to move to North Carolina and relocate near my children so that I can spend time with my grandkids. I'm going to travel around the world. I have some other things. I want to volunteer more actively at my church, and I want to continue on with that. And I just haven't been able to because of how much time it takes. Sellers that can see that future are going to be more confident about letting go of their business because they know what's going on. Whereas a seller who says, geez, I don't really know what I'm going to do. And so, that's important. I think the first questions they're going to always want to ask, we're going to be talking about these. What is my business worth? What is the selling process? And should I use a broker? Those are the first questions that sellers are want to get answered. And that's, what we're going to be able to do early in the early stages of the program today, talk about that. But what I'd like to do now is say, hey, at this stage 1, what's the buyer up to? And turn it over to Dave.
Okay. And we're going to sort of think about the buyer, so the buyer psychology a little bit. And one of the things that clearly is going on is there's some change that is either occurred or is pending. I don't know, a number of you, if you were on, Andy Church, who's on, introduced himself, and his goal is to get out of the Seattle area into Colorado. So there's clearly at least a geographic change that's coming up for him. But one of the most common things we see is that the buyer is not as connected to their corporate lifestyle as they were. Something has changed. They're in a job they don't like now, or the economy is moved the job away from them. So they're looking at a way of getting control of their future, buying a business. I'll be in charge. I'll be able to hire and fire, and, it'll succeed on my skills. Another category of corporate buyers are somebody that had a dream of being in a particular industry, restaurants, fly fishing, around here, cycling, health foods. And so the time is that, hey, I'm in my 50s. I want to go be a bike mechanic for some crazy reason. And then, so other buyers that we'll see have a very different view. Is they've been entrepreneurs before. They've sold their business. They have capital they want to invest in and get into another business. And they have a different set of skills. A lot of skills having sold a business, run business. So occasionally they make a very nice buyer. Sometimes it's entrepreneurs who just want another business to get a bigger portfolio. And then there are the ones that people think about a lot, which is the strategic or investor buyer. Gosh, I've got a great business and REI should buy it because I would fit into this niche for them. And so they're buying it not to run it, not to put their heart and soul in it, but they're buying it to fill a spot, expand their market. And they have a little bit different psychology on that thing. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time with them on this in this presentation. But I'll say that of the business I've sold, I probably sold 30 to 40% of them to businesses that could be considered strategic. They want to expand into a different area, different geography kind of thing. Now here's where we're thinking about a buyer, and they're going to give suggestions for buyers. And one of them is they need to figure out what's their above their rationale to become a business owner. what's their time frame? When are they ready to commit? And so, obviously that's pretty significant because you're going to invest capital, you're going to get a loan, you're still investing your capital. So it's important for a buyer to figure out, I'm ready to jump from my corporate job, or I really need to earn money, but I want to own my own business. I got to go through that mental decision point. One of the things for sellers to realize is that buyers have a wide choice. You're selling your one business, but buyers can be on the web. They can be looking around, talking to friends, and have a wide choice of businesses. So that's, part of this whole process is helping them find the right business for them. And it's actually a positive if a buyer has looked deeply at another business and not been able to bring it in for some reason, because they've learned, kind of real world learning experience here. That's my thing to change. So buyers, the first questions they've got are similar. Okay, do I buy or build? Do I want to just build on the momentum of the restaurant down the street, or do I want to rent a space, outfit it, create a menu, and have it all myself? And they're very different paths, different time frames, different investments. Inevitably, it's what the buyer thinks, how they think they can succeed, what they really want to do. Then comes the practical side of things, which is financial resources. And you got to be, buyer in step one or step two, they're going to have to kind of figure out what financial resources I have and what does that translate to. And so if you're going into typically using an SBA financing, you can buy a business that's 4 to 5 times the size of your down payment. That's just a rule of thumb. So what that means is you've got $225,000 to invest, then you can buy a business of about $1 million. Interest rates affect these things a little bit, but that's keep that in the back of your mind. Now that I think there's this saying that attributed to Confucius that about the confusion that you get from many choices, the kind of the curse of many choices is it's confusing. And that certainly applies to buyers. And this is where buyers have got to figure out, gosh, am I interested in, do I have a skill? Do I want to be in the trades? Do I want to manage crews? Do I want to fix things? And so that'll help, focus them. Or, do you want a restaurant? Are you into food? Do you have some experience? Retail, manufacturing, et cetera. So it's important to kind of figure out what you're good at, what you want to do. And there's also a little bit of reality is there's some businesses that require licenses, specialized trainings. And so that again can help whittle down what a buyer's after. Geography, I mentioned Andy a little while ago, is another relatively straightforward but necessary choice. One of the biggest discussions that people have mentally with themselves in Colorado is, do I want to be in the Front Range where the population is, or do I want to be in the mountains? And the mountains have their wonderful outside opportunities and seasons, so you can take time off, but it can be expensive there. So that's a real decision you have to make, especially if you're thinking about buying a business in the mountains. And then finally, you want to think about how you want to be involved. Do you want to own and operate the business, be the guy in the back office, talking to customers, what have you? Or are you buying this business and you're looking for one you can just be in the back and spend 20 hours and show up every Thursday kind of thing? And that's where you'd have a general manager or something. So again, a lot of decisions that some are not incredibly obvious as you think about buying a business, but it will save you if you do that. So, Don?
Great. Okay. So we're going to presume that all the buyers and all the sellers have done all that good work in stage one, and they've arrived at the place where now they're ready to move forward. So let's look at the seller. The seller has said, okay, I am committed. I'm ready to sell. And so what do I need to do? Well, the first thing is you need to decide if you're going to use a broker and which broker. There are multiple brokers. We're very proud of our Front Range Business Company, but there are other brokers. And so, you know, a seller might want to spend some time analyzing the question of which broker and that kind of thing. The seller's also going to enter into a listing agreement. Just like a real estate, a broker is going to list your business that is for sale. There are going to be some terms in there about how long the listing agreement goes. There's going to be terms about what price it's going to be offered at, and the exclusive rights that that broker has to sell your business. And no broker is going to take a listing where the seller also has the option to sell it to other people or do whatever they want. You just, as a seller, you need to be prepared that you're going to sign an exclusive listing agreement with a broker if a broker is in fact going to handle your transaction. But you find that broker that you're happy with. The commitment stage here, we are past the let's put our toe in the water, let's test the market. No, we are really, if you have a broker and the broker is listing that business, every intention has to be to get that business sold. At that point, you move past that stage one thinking, and everything from stage two forward is full speed ahead. And so what needs to get done? For the seller, you cannot bring a business to the market until you've really prepared for what the buyers are going to come at you with. If you're not ready for the onslaught of buyers and all of their questions and everything they're going to need to know to feel like they're mitigating their risk, they're making a good choice, their investment is solid, you need to prepare to tell that story and assemble. So there's a variety of key documents that are needed. And, you know, first and foremost, everybody wants to see the financials, and that's critical. Financials are going to include P&L reports. They're going to include balance sheets. They're going to include taxes, other documents that can be very, very relevant to the selling process, your leases that you have, supplier agreements that you have, understanding the underlying costs of running the business. So, for example, you know, your employees, what are their pay rates? How many do you have? W-2s. There are a lot of financial documents that the buyer's going to want to see. And what you don't want to do is take the business to market and not have those ready. I want to talk about financials. You'll see the word clean financials there on the slide. Okay, I get it. Small businesses can operate with what I'll call messy or inconsistent financials. The seller probably knows their business so well inside and out that the financials themselves are not the most important operating tool. They know what inventory should look like. They don't need to look at their balance sheet to decide whether they have enough inventory, and they know kind of what their employee labor costs are. They don't need to look at the P&L every 2 weeks necessarily. They know they have a stable employee base, those kinds of things. But a buyer is going to look at those financials and try and figure out your business. And if those financials don't accurately represent the story of your business in an efficient way, the buyer is going to kind of step back and say, I don't know if I can trust this. I don't know it. The seller to go, no, really, trust me. This is the way it just doesn't work like that. Buyers are smart and they're going to spend time. So just at the outset, just make the point. Financials have to be well organized, and the broker is going to work with the seller to try and get everything cleaned up and in a nice tight package so that the buyer, when they ask for those, can be delivered something that they can understand. There's also a selling package. This is the marketing side of things. We typically call it a confidential business review or a confidential information memorandum, CBR or CIM. This is a storytelling piece. This is a document that's going to explain a little bit about the history of the business, what changes it's gone through, why it operates where it does, where it operates, who the customers are, why the town that it's in would be a great town to live in if you bought this business, and a number of other things. But the whole thing is, this is a story with pictures, and it's typically 10 to 20 pages, and it's really a valuable tool, especially when the buyer isn't local. You might have a business and you're going to get somebody to move from Dallas to purchase your business because it's worthwhile to do that. Well, they're not going to know very much about Fort Collins, Colorado, likely. And so they need to be introduced to these things. So again, this CBR or CIM are what are going to tell the qualitative descriptions of the business. There's one other thing, and this is, Dave can back me up on this. This is becoming more important, literally, it seems, by the day, but certainly by the month or by the year. And that is, for any business that you're going to go to market with, there needs to be a pre-qualification by SBA lenders that this business and the price associated with taking this business to market and other things, that there are lenders who are going to want to loan money to buyers to purchase this business. And if you do not get lenders supporting the transaction through a pre-qual, you're going to be in trouble. Because if you can't finance the business, who are you going to sell it to? As Dave said, buyer's going to show up with 20% or 25% or 15% as a down payment, and the rest is going to be financed. You've got to have SBA lenders to do that. So those are things that the seller needs to do in stage 2 to be ready to do the selling side of the equation. Back to Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So again, this is almost like looking at the other side of the mirror. But the buyer at this stage is just as busy. And the real title here, the real objective and task is the buyer's got to go from dreaming to committing to buying. Because you can spend years and more time than you want, looking at websites for businesses and dreaming about being an ice cream manufacturer. So the first thing, and we mentioned this before, but just to get more tangible, you got to figure out the money side, and that, first look internal. What's the source of funds? Savings, 401ks. There are very interesting programs you can use with your 401k. home equity loans, always the cheapest money out there. Sale of a personal asset, a vacation home or something, or a gift from relatives. And by the way, all of it works and it's fine. There's no issue with it. But the key thing is kind of getting things together, because a seller is not going to accept your offer unless you can prove you've got funds to move forward. Because if you accept an offer, then you would typically come off the market. So doing your homework, getting ahead, it's like buying a home. You need to figure out how much, how much you're going to be able to muster to buy the house. As an example, there's just little twists and turns here. Is that if you're planning to use money from a family member, a gift, quote unquote, for the down payment, a lot of SBA lenders will require those funds are seasoned. Basically, they're sitting in a bank for 6 months or so. And they go, depending on what's going on in the market, it's a lot or a little of seasoning, but you need to figure that out. So you got to get the money well in advance of buying the home. I'm sorry, buying the business. If you're going to use a home equity line, you got to make sure you're qualified, that you do have enough equity, and that your bank will do a home equity line. And interestingly, there's things right now where it takes a while to get an official appraiser out to look at your home and get that information back to the bank. As crazy as that may seem, that can throw off your timing in buying something. So once you've sort of figured out what your financial resources, then you need to go talk to a lender. We'd always suggest you talk to a couple SBA lenders. And what you're looking to do is get a pre-qual, so you can get a letter, just again, as you're buying a house, for them to sit back and say, hey, absolutely, we'll lend Joe Blow $1 million on a qualified business. And it's not guaranteed, but they'll say, hey, Wells Fargo, they've agreed that I'm a good credit risk and everything else. So at that point, if you kind of run through it, and you've also figured out what fees there are and kind of gone through that process, so you're poised to get more serious. So after you've done that, the next thing, and this has become much more important as interest rates have gone up and the credit market has tightened up, is you're going to have to sell yourself. A lender, they want to get paid. They want their interest. That's how they make their money, yada, yada, yada. Part of that is they're going to say, okay, can this person deliver? And so you need to put together a CV, a resume, update your LinkedIn, and be prepared. So if you're going to buy a restaurant, to say, prove, yeah, I have some skills there. Eating in a lot of restaurants is probably not going to qualify you for that. But it's important that you figure out the businesses that a third party would consider you as success, that you potentially could be successful. So to wrap up, not to overkill you on this whole thing, but it's important to get ready before you get serious, so that you can be successful in buying a business. And while while a transaction is going to take 4+ months, everything moves more quickly if you are ahead of time. You've talked to lenders, you've got your CV. The lender says, so why are you qualified to buy this restaurant? Boom. I worked for 10 years in one. You can say that, and here's my financial resources. And by the way, being able to respond quickly also sends the message to the seller who's trying to figure you out is, oh, wow, these guys really have their act together. Yeah, they'll be successful with my business. Don, let me turn it
Great.
back.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the message both Dave and I have been making here, right? There's a lot of preparation work. There's a lot of for buyers and for sellers to get to the point that the business is actually for sale, it takes a while. And it takes a lot of thought, and it takes a lot of consideration of various things. So, spend the time, put the time in to do that. Don't think you're just going to start looking at businesses and buy one in a snap. Okay, we're at stage 3. Finished 2, done a lot of prep work. Here's an interesting step in that this is the first step where a buyer and a specific business are actually going to intersect. This is up till now, they've been doing parallel paths, but it hasn't involved any individual specific business. So let's go through it, and let's start with the seller here again. So we've done all the market prep. We got it ready. So now we're going to do a listing. We're going to go public with the listing for this event. And the public listing at this point is generic. I know sellers are always worried. I don't want anybody to know that my business is for sale. And that's just the opposite, say, of real estate, where you're trying to get the biggest sign out front you can that says for sale. With a business, you're trying to sell the business without anybody knowing the business is for sale. And that's an important role that a broker takes, is to maintain that confidentiality and show how this can be done. And it can be done, and it is. Because there's a lot to protect when you're transferring ownership. You want to transfer as much value as you can, but you may not want to, in the early stages, you may not want to share that with your landlords that you're planning to sell. You may not want to share that with your suppliers. You may not want to share it with your customers. And certainly that's true with respect to employees. You don't want disruption. You want to be transferring the full value of the business. And to do that, you need it to stay moving. And so it's really, really important to have a plan for how this confidentiality is going to be maintained. Now, depending on the particular business, and there might be a number of different things that you're trying to do. So one might be, Dave was talking about the strategic buyers. Maybe the marketing campaign for your business is a kind of a highly targeted outreach to some geographically or industry appropriate buyer candidates. And you're just taking the business out to them to test the waters and see what they think. Or you might have a business where it makes much more sense to do just a general campaign targeted to all those people out there. And there are tens of thousands of them looking to buy businesses. And there are places where those buyers go to find the businesses are for sale. So maybe that's what you do. You take the business out to them. And so, the goal, what's the goal of a marketing strategy? It's to get as many reasonable inquiries and candidates as possible and to create a demand marketplace. I was talking about a minute ago about how not to reveal your business. Let me just give you an example. I'll take Longmont. Let's say there's a Longmont-based company, and they make patented plastic valves for containers that are used to transfer agricultural chemicals. And by the way, we do see businesses that are that specific. That's the kind of thing that they do, right? So if we said we're selling a Longmont-based company that makes patented plastic valves for containers for the transporting agricultural chemicals, that would be really easy to find on Google, and everybody would know that business is for sale. So we don't say that. We say a northern Colorado, spread the geography out, plastics manufacturing business give it a category so you know it's not retail, you know it's in manufacturing. With $2 million annual sales, some indication of size, there are probably 500 businesses along the northern Colorado area that could fit something like that, or some number of hundreds, right? So it's not giving away, revealing who the business is. And that's the way you do that. And so we get it out there. There's a whole marketing strategy campaign to go on. We're going to get inquiries coming in. It is the broker's job to vet all of these. Now, I recently sold a business that had 143 inquiries. I'm currently selling a business right now. We haven't gotten to the letter of intent stage, the offer stage. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I've had 55 inquiries. There are a lot of inquiries. Sellers, you do not want to be taking calls from all of these people. Not all of them are qualified. Not all of them are worth your time. And it's the broker's job to really work through all of those. I have sold some businesses that only got 10 inquiries. The whole point is you're looking to get qualified candidates. And when you get those, you're going to put non-disclosure agreements in place so that you can start providing some staged information. And the more the buyer convinces you of their seriousness and their qualifications, the more of that staged information the broker's going to release. I always tell buyers, don't feel entitled. Don't feel like you can just ask for anything you want because you're asking. You're going to get qualified by the broker. That's just part of the process. Okay, so Dave, that's what the seller's doing. What's a buyer doing?
Okay. Where in this stage, what the buyer is doing is he or she is looking through websites, getting on mailing lists, looking at databases, websites of brokerage firms. They're looking for what could I buy? And this can be a bit overwhelming. That's why hopefully you've gone through those steps and sort of qualified, so you kind of know, maybe you have an idea of what the business is that you're looking for. And this is, again, just to emphasize again, the seller has one business to sell and the buyer has multiple options. So they have kind of different views on what they're doing at this point. And one of the things that's going on is the buyer is looking at types of businesses, things that he's narrowed down, but that person is also looking at what's the best opportunity for my investment, which is a little bit different, again, than the seller. And it's important, by the way, if you're a seller, to have an idea what the buyer is going through, so you can kind of look at each other. And of course, it's important for the buyer to understand that seller is selling their baby, what they've worked on for 20 years. So with all these choices out there, without an event that's pushing buyers, they can be in the market for months or years while looking for a buyer, for a business to buy. And sometimes buyers know exactly what they want. I want a printing company. I need to get bigger. Away you go, and the deal can go pretty quickly as the tighter the qualifications are. So as the buyer inquiries come in, the broker handles them. And as Don mentioned, a lot of times the buyer just give me stuff. I want to read stuff. Give me everything you got. And frankly, as a broker, what we need to do is go through a process. We need to qualify this person before we share any company specific information. Do they have some skills? Are they a good buyer? Do they have money? Do they have skills that could be successful? And, some buyers can say, well, just give me stuff and I'll tell you. Well, you know what, this is somebody, we're maintaining confidentiality. We're looking for the right buyers for both sides. So if it's a $2 million business and the buyer is qualified for $100,000 business, it's not worth anyone's time, even though it's fascinating to read the confidential business review, I'm sure. But once we go through a qualifying process, then we'll get to the NDA and send the buyer to sign the NDA. And then at that point, they're pre-qualified. They've signed the NDA, and this is where the broker can share company identifying information to the buyer. And we've already, as a broker, we've talked to them and emphasized again that even though you signed a non-disclosure, this is not to share. Because if it's a business you want, it could damage it, and you don't want that. So the objective of this is so the buyer gets an idea of should they continue to pay attention to this. So should the buyer continue to have interest, it's not now time to get even more into the qualifying process. Very much the buyer to get information, and for the broker or for the seller, if they're doing directly, is to get more information about the buyer themselves. And that leads us really to step 4.
Great. So you'll notice now that we get a flip to step 4, something has changed here. We've always been leading with the seller because they were the first ones. They came in, they tried to get their business for sale. But when we get to step 4, we're going to have the buyer lead now. The buyer is really the first, they're taking the most action. The seller is responding. So Dave, I'm just going to keep you going here with stage 4, which is some initial due diligence.
Absolutely. And so due diligence is a broad term, and we're going to use it twice here. At this step, think of it as initial, and it's really digging into the opportunity as a buyer to say, A, could I afford it? B, do I want to afford it? Do I want to get involved? Can I see how I'm going to be successful? And the first start of it is we've assembled a bunch of data and a story in this confidential business review. So the buyers, absorb that, think about it, maybe get on the web and do a little research on what's going on in the biking industry or what have you. So we're not trying to flood the buyer with every bit of data there possibly is. We want them to understand the business, understand how it works, so that they can continue to go through the process. One of the challenges is that it's a natural tendency, just give me everything. And so from experience, what that can lead to is analysis paralysis. Here are the financials. Later on, you can have the tax returns, but you don't need it right now. Look at the financials, look at how the business operates, look at who the type of customers are. And I think the buyer at this point has got to balance their interest. And this is where somebody who may have a financial background have a harder time to get into this, because they'll obsess a bit too much on the qualitative, the financials. At this point, you're really making you want to identify and understand the qualitative side, the financials and the speed of business and things like that, but also qualitatively understand, could you envision yourself running this business? And where those are, where those coincide is where we'll take the next step in putting together an offer. So why don't we look at what the seller's doing in this process?
Great. And Dave, thank you. I'm going to add, in this initial due diligence, what we commonly see is adding in a 45-minute or a 1-hour phone call with a qualified buyer candidate with the seller, not necessarily a site visit, although that's possible depending on the business, but something that lets the buyer connect with the seller. But it's the broker's responsibility to make sure whoever gets that opportunity, that is not a waste of time for the seller. That has to be a quality encounter. Okay, what's going on for the seller at this side? You know, really, as Dave mentioned earlier, this is very mirror image. In step 3, the broker should have performed the initial qualification of the buyer. So any buyer who's now engaged in step 4 should be a qualified buyer, a viable candidate. You hear the term serious buyer. Everybody's serious, but they have to be viable as a candidate to be able to take the transaction to the finish line. And brokers are very good at determining who that pool is. And I think from my experience, at least, I would say 5 to 15% of the buyers who inquire on a business might fall into that category of being viable. So that's 1 in 20. That means if you had 60 inquiries at 5%, you'd only have 3. Maybe you have 5, maybe you have 8. We'll see. But it's important to note that there's only a handful of buyers who are going to get through to the seller and get to this level where they're really looking at things. Other qualification things, you can see, you know, what's up there. Dave talked about most of them. But the other qualification is really making sure that the buyer fits. So, for example, if the buyer's not local, are they willing to relocate, or would they want to relocate the business? That certainly is going to be a disruptive thing to have to come to terms with. Experience in the industry, transferable skills, financial wherewithal. Another question is, hey, buyer, what are you expecting the seller to continue to do after the sale to help you run the business and get started? Do you want a handshake at closing and seller walks away because you know exactly what you're doing? Or are you getting into something very new and you want the seller to stay connected for 6 months while you learn on the job? Time frame, you know, are you looking to buy now? Or do you have kids in school? It's January and you have kids in school, you want to move them in the summer. So maybe you want to close the business 8 months down the road. You know, a little bit of your background on how long you've been looking for a business, what the personal life is like. So on the seller side, and it's really the broker doing it, these are all the qualifications. You know, if somebody said, well, I've got 6 children under the age of 10, and I know I've got a business that takes 60 to 70 hours a week to run, I'd have a question as to how you're going to pull that off. Because owning a small business can be a lot of work. So they're important questions. This is what the seller is doing. Let's go to stage 5, Dave.
Okay, and so now we're to offer, right? We're going to try to move forward seriously. So offer is a generic term, and it creates some confusion for a lot of buyers moving forward. So what an offer isn't is an email or a casual statement on the phone. I want to give them $30K for this thing. That's interesting, but it's not an offer. I mean, I think that any broker or anyone trying to do business you need to write stuff down. You want a solid statement, formal statement of what the buyer is offering for the business. And the typical format is called a letter of intent. There's a million of them out on the internet. We have templates that you can use, and this is coming from the buyer to the seller. And so what a letter of intent is really a written offer. It's not the final contract, which we'll obviously talk about later. But it's, first of all, for everybody, it's non-binding. So, and what we find is, by the way, when people do an LOI, they're going to go through with the deal because it's a bit of effort. So because it's non-binding, you don't need a lot of legalese. You can have your attorney involved, but most people don't, and so you don't need to pay for that. The intent of an LOI is, given what I know today, and I'm going to look at things more carefully to make sure that the taxes say the things your internal P&L said, as an example, that I intend to purchase this business, where everybody involved, banks, everybody, this is the launch to acquire this business. So it absolutely is, put together by the buyer, delivered to the seller. And so one of the key points of an LOI is not just the dollars. It's what's the structure? What is, Don mentioned, what do you expect out of the seller? You say, I want a transition of 60 days and 6 months of phone calls. Or I want the seller to finance this percentage of the business, or, what have you, but you're putting it together. You're saying, here are all the deal points that will be memorialized in an asset purchase agreement that we talk about. But it is much more than the price. And I think, and this is where the buyer can talk to the broker, but this is where buyers can get nervous. Oh my gosh, what if I was the only one running this bike shop? What would I do? And there you get a little bit of they haven't bought it, but a little bit of buyer regret. But just think about what you need to be successful, what you expect from the acquisition. Yep, I want all the furniture in the restaurant. I want everything that's included, so I can, the point of purchase system, so I can start selling and welcoming people in the first day. So as part of the LOI, you also, it's fair to say, hey, let me tell you, here's a couple contingent things. Like I'm going to have to be able to turn my letter I got from the bank into financing. They're going to have to step in and agree that, yep, I'm going to pay this, and they're going to look at the business also. The other thing, in a lot of cases, unless it's really a e-commerce business, is the lease. And you're going to say, hey, it's contingent upon me getting a reasonable lease out of the landlord that's either assuming it or a new lease. That's a bit of a detail that you work with the landlord. So the deal is always contingent. There's these contingencies. And you want to just represent them fairly and accurately. Here are the things I worry about. And maybe in some cases, maybe there's only one supplier. You say, hey, it's contingent upon these guys still selling me product moving forward. And so the one thing I'll tell you is this is an offer, so it's going to be negotiated. You're going to provide it to the seller, your best shot. You'll represent it, working with the buyer and working with the broker to say, well, here's what I'm thinking. Here's why I'm asking for these deal points moving forward. So then the seller can evaluate it. One thing I will tell you is that you're going to work with the seller as a buyer throughout the whole process. So you want to be careful, at least keep things on a business level, and let's try not build up any bad blood. Not, you got to be careful in your saying, I think it's really worth this. Love what you did. I think it's worth this. But be careful that you're not telling the seller, their baby's ugly. So anyways, we'll move forward. I can, talk this thing to death, but both sides will sign it, and that will touch off the next phase. Don?
Yes, and I just have a note that I like to bring forward. Buyers, this isn't the favorite message that you're going to get today. I'm sorry. Sellers, this is what they're looking for. They're hoping to get multiple offers. So Dave presented kind of what one buyer is doing to get a letter of intent to the seller. But if the business is attractive in the market, if it's properly priced, if it's been presented well and the financials are clean and they're understandable, it is very possible that there could be 2, 3, 4, or 5 buyers who all want to make offers and give multiple letters of intent. And I know a buyer would love to put, hey, I'm only giving you 48 hours to accept this, or I'm out. Well, that is a ticket out. That is a guaranteed ticket out for you as a buyer, because the seller is going to say, you know what, I really need to know what the marketplace is saying about my business. It's not as cut and dry as a commodity like a building or a house. A business is kind of a living, breathing entity, and brokers working with sellers have done their best to put a price on that business that's attractive, that brings buyers forward to say, boy, that looks like a good investment of my funds and my future. But there could be multiple buyers who arrive at that same point. And what the seller's going to want to do is move through those different letters of intent and try and find the strongest offer. And Dave mentioned negotiate. Absolutely. I use the term guidance. When I see 5 offers and I see 2 are stronger and 3 are less strong, as a broker, I want those 3 buyers to know that their offers aren't as strong. I'm not going to tell them the details of what one person is doing or another person is doing, but I'm going to let them know that for these reasons in general, your offer is not strong enough to be chosen. If you want this business, if this is important to you to acquire this business for your personal future, just want you to know that you're going to have to step forward more. So that's all part of the process. And that literally can take 2 or 3 weeks, which is why I say don't put a 48-hour timeline on an offer. It's just not, it's not going to happen. And so ultimately, though, there is going to be an offer and a buyer with whom a deal has been negotiated and a mutually acceptable letter of intent is signed. And when that happens, both parties should really understand this deal is expected to close according to the terms of the LOI, the letter of intent. Yes, the letter of intent is non-binding, but it does represent the true intention of the parties. At least that's what the expectation is. So what does the seller have to do at this point? Unfortunately, the seller, and typically through the broker, so it becomes Dave's job or my job, to go back to the buyers and say, you were not the first choice. And there will be buyers who that'll be the third time or the fourth time that that's happened to them. In another case, it might be the first time. And so, but they need to know they are not the first choice, but they're also offered the opportunity to stay connected to the transaction because anything can happen down the road. And would you like to be recontacted if we're not able to get this transaction to the finish line? And there needs to be a lot of courtesy, and there needs to be a lot of consideration for the hard work that the buyers have done and the sellers have done. And we need to all be on good terms. But it's a fact that if you have multiple buyers and only one business to sell, you can't split the business up and sell it to multiple people. So there's a hard decision that has to be made. Let's go to, we've got a buyer. We're under letter of intent. We've got a seller. Dave, what's going on next?
So here's an interesting situation. So what you have here is a lot of enthusiasm, frankly, on both sides. But you're here getting ready to buy this fly fishing shop that you've always wanted to own as a buyer. And so in this phase, you're digging in and really getting deeper into due diligence. And what the meta question you want to have answered is, you want to get all the information that proves that the ability of the business or the structure and the seller that can transfer this value that exists today to you. Okay, there is you're trying to make sure you get the information that proves that it will happen, and you are, as sort of a subtitle beyond that, is it you're saying, all right, I saw your marketing materials. I'm checking to make sure that those financials, you really have that number of employees, suppliers, customers, that I can feel very comfortable that what you told me is absolutely the truth. Okay. And it's not hey, I think he's a liar, but you need to feel comfortable. And your lender, by the way, will get involved to make sure that works also. Here's what not to do, and unfortunately happens more often in the days of the internet than you'd like. And that is, go onto the web and get a list of due diligence questions. Those due diligence questions, I guarantee you, were put together by somebody who's buying mega companies. They've got a bunch of MBAs running around analyzing billion-dollar companies, and somebody decided to put it out there. I had one strategic who gave this 12-page list of questions and said, yeah, just answer the ones that are relevant to you. To which we said, yeah, okay, we're not going to answer any because they're not relevant. If you want to play that game. So as a buyer, you need to be prepared to defend each item, what you're questioning, right? Because you're sending someone off to do some work. Okay. Make sure they're legit, because you don't want a bunch of stuff that doesn't work. Why do you want a bunch of information that you're never going to look at? So the other side of it is you are trying to execute those two things, that what I was told is accurate. And yes, we can transfer this value, but you're not at this point being trained. This is not your training. This is, that training of how to run the business happens after you buy it. So that's another place where the broker has to step in and go, whoa, stop. You cannot sit behind the counter and watch sales go on as people buy smokes. That's not what you get to do until you buy, until you put the money down. And there'll be plenty of time to go do that. And so what you've got to do is look at, what do I need to feel comfortable, but not be invasive also. So it's not the time to go get introduced to all the suppliers and all the customers. That happens after you buy the business. So look at information you need to make comfortable. Yep, okay, these customers are doing business with this business, and they'll continue to do it. And very specifically, usually in a business, you don't get to meet the employees until you've done the deal. Okay. Occasionally there will be, the employees will in fact be the business in a lot of medical situations. So what you'll do is that'll be way at the end, after near the end of due diligence, and maybe after the asset purchase agreement is signed, because that's a real risk, because you could walk in and say, and make employees nervous, and then if deal doesn't go through, then the seller has challenges in their business that they didn't plan to put together. At the same time you're involved here is you're working with your lender, you're formalizing the lending commitment. Sellers, I'll just tell you, there will be requests that come from the lenders, and much of it is logical, some of it isn't, and that's where the broker gets to do battle with the lender at times. It's like, guys, you don't need this. You're also dealing with the lease, make sure you got the right, you'll be able to get a lease from the landlord. And that tends to be a little bit nerve-wracking if it's a smaller organization. You're dealing with kind of the fellow who owns, some doctor owns a little bit of property. It's okay. It's probably getting his attention that's the issue. When you have a big lender, or I should say landlord, sometimes it's just getting their attention, getting the right person. Oh, okay, sure, yeah, we can do that, and going through their paperwork. But it's got to be done. It's probably the least fun thing moving forward, other than dealing with lenders. The other thing that you want to do is, where there is some license required, is that you want to make sure you've got a plan to get that, whether it's keeping a master plumber online, taking the test yourself, what have you, but you got to have a plan for you to be successful. And I will guarantee you, if you're working with a lender, they will want to see that in triplicate, because that's a risk. Banks are great at, they don't want to take any risks. So they will help the process along. So when you're formalizing a lending commitment, what it is basically a commitment letter from them that says, yep, here's the closing date, I'll have the money, you have to do this, away we go. There's a lot of work on both sides here.
Yeah. And I'm just going to move to seller here on stage 6. I'm also going to point out, Dave, we got 14 minutes. So yep. We're going to, here's the nice thing. The seller on stage 6 is really responding to the buyer. The most important thing for the seller is to recognize they're going to have to pull back the covers. They're going to have to respond to these requests. They're going to have to maybe give some access to various people. So it's starting to get real here, so that the transaction can move forward. But that's step 6 on the seller side, is really to follow the lead from the buyer and the broker. And back to you.
So now we're memorializing the LOI. This is the asset purchase agreement, and this is the legal agreement that everybody, here's the process we're going to go through. And this is where you do want to have your attorney involved. And attorneys, if you get, a good business attorney, they'll have boilerplates that they have. Most of the brokers, we have a template that we paid an attorney to put together that you can use as a template and go modify it, whatever you want. But again, this is coming from the buyer. The buyer is initiating this.
Hey, Dave, can I interrupt for 1 second? I just wanted to let the audience know we actually have a program coming up later this summer. It's all about the letter of intent, contracts, and closing as specific stages of these 9 stages where we go in depth to talk about those, as well as a program coming up about valuation. So if we don't cover all of your questions today, just know we have a show that goes in depth on those things in particular. Okay, sorry.
Okay, cool. And so the purchase agreement is the LOI terms, and you're restating them. If you're a buyer, don't think that this is the time to go renegotiate the LOI, because you'll create bad feelings, and that when you have somebody trying to outsmart everybody else, that can at times nuke a deal, and it's bad feelings. Now, that said, if due diligence, you found out something happened, something that's different than what was represented, then it's perfectly okay to say, okay, well, this customer who had 20% of the sales sent a note in that says they're going to the competitor. I want some consideration for that. And so that's something that doesn't happen very often. Okay. Not the time to willy-nilly change the offer. So once, the LOI, you're typically closing the deal 90% of the time. Once you purchase agreement signed, it's 99%. You'll have some boilerplate that we'll get from attorneys. Sometimes there's a attorney to attorney. We'll have a discussion that nobody wants to hear about those terms, but both sides are trying to protect them. So as long as you have rational, Colorado-based attorneys, should you be in Colorado, they'll know what it is, and we'll be able to work through it. Thing I will tell you is that with the purchase agreement, once we sign it, and that's before the closing, is there will be some contingencies like, hey, the bank has got to come through. Even though you've got the binding agreement, you can say, hey, this is, if the bank doesn't provide the money, then we have to go work on other things. And so let's move to the seller and then closing.
All right. Seller. So again, the seller is really following the lead of the buyer. The purchase agreement has come in. Unlike the LOI, there's only one, because we've selected the specific buyer that we're going to work with. So we don't have that process of sorting through multiple purchase agreements. It is a binding agreement called the contract purchase agreement, asset purchase agreement. If it's an asset sale, that's another area we can talk about. But attorneys are involved. As Dave says, the attorneys are going to work through things. They all have preferences. The only thing that I want to share is you want to make sure, whether you're the buyer or the seller, you are working with an attorney who is competent and familiar with small business transactions, so that you're working in their area of expertise. And number two, you're looking for attorneys who want to help you get to the finish line, not thwart your efforts by excessively redlining or putting in risk protections that aren't necessary because they're for eventualities that are never going to occur. And you certainly don't want them hoovering that money out of your pocket with their hourly rates. So you're looking for people that are competent and efficient As brokers, we can usually help you find those. As Dave says, this is not the time to introduce deal point changes unless there's material. But if all those things are in place, then that's what's going to happen. You know, the deal's going to move forward. So let's close it, Dave.
Okay. And the one thing I will tell you is that especially the buyer is very busy at this point. There's a ton of critical tasks that are not that are sometimes small, but there's a lot of them. So being organized is very important. And you know, Don and I and many other brokers will give you a multi-page checklist to look at to give the buyer the opportunity to succeed here. In fact, that the checklist is Excel forms, have seller things, lender things, you know, buyer things. So everyone can kind of see, okay, everybody's everything's heading toward the close in 15 days here. You know, there'll be a lot of things that we need just to get to closing. You know, it's financing, it's getting the lease signed, setting up your corporate entity, licenses. Sometimes there's the SBA will require a life insurance policy. Sometimes it's signing supplier agreements. It's all putting things together so that at closing, the seller gets their money, the buyer gets the keys and an operational business. You know, some of the things that you need to really think about is you want to make sure as a buyer that you have a plan that says, boom, Mr. Employee, here's how you get paid. Because in this process is that one entity goes away. So the seller, in essence, fires the employee and you've got to hire them immediately. So there's a payroll process, and that's, if you want to make sure you keep your employees, that should run smoothly. There's just a ton of details. You know, we don't have enough time to go torture you with this, but it's really execution. Nothing super clever. Just keep chugging along here. Don-san?
Yeah. So seller is supporting all these activities, you know, providing information about how all the business works, making sure that the buyer can get their workers' comp insurance in place, and that they have a merchant services account for the credit card so that they can swipe cards in the day they take over the business. The lenders will have lots of requirements, lots of documents they're going to ask for. And of course, the closing documents are going to be prepared in advance. Everybody's going to need to review those. There will be a settlement statement. Settlement statement accounts for every penny of the money that flows between lender, buyer, seller, commissions to brokers, whatever. It's all accounted for. There's things that are prorated. If you've paid for a year of advertising up front, and you're only 6 months into that, then the buyer has to purchase the last 6 months of advertising from the seller. It's on the settlement statement. You know, these are all details. I think the important point is there's lots of details. And then at closing, I talked about having competent attorneys. Here is where a competent attorney really earns their money. And that is, they get all of these documents together in order as the closing attorney, nothing missing, nothing out of line. They're reviewed, they're accurate, they're together. And then there's a whole set of filings that have to be done with the state of Colorado or with other entities to show that this business has been sold. You might be exchanging trademark rights. You might be exchanging corporate names. You might be doing a number of things, sales tax licenses. Just making sure that all of these things are in place so that when the buyer takes over the business, there are no gaps in their ability to operate that business, and that the filings are done. And I can tell you, if they are not done properly, it can really come back to haunt you later on. So this is where a closing attorney is valuable. And of course, the closing attorney, also called the escrow attorney, actually not only does the settlement statement, but receives all of those funds, everything that's coming in from the lender, everything that came in from the buyer, whatever other sources there might be that funds come in, and then actually disperses those funds and accounts for everything, and might do a wire transfer into this account or give a check to that person, whatever it is, but they're taking care of that. Dave? Oh, look at that. There was a slide that I forgot was there. I was just talking about the importance of the attorney in closing the transaction. So I'm going to let you look at that slide for about 3 more seconds, because it's really covering all the things that we just talked about. I'll add lien clearance, making sure there's no liens on the business. All right, post-closing. What do you got, Dave?
Okay, so we're doing the transition at this point. So as I mentioned, you're hiring the employees. We'll always, you want to engage the employees. So, typically it'll be a surprise. The seller will come in, hey, I sold it, but I love Mr. Johnson here, and get in, buy coffee and donuts and get in and have a conversation with the employees. At this point, that's probably the most important thing. Transferring utility services, vehicle titles, you can do that ongoing. Utility services, you kind of like, yeah, I took over on the 15th, and they'll backdate, and it's more just execution versus anything complicated. Occasionally, there'll be something, especially with a license, where the seller will have to be there to step up and say, yeah, really, they're going to do it, kind of thing. Then employees, and then it's customers, suppliers, distributors, right? It's engaging with these guys. Love you. I jumped into this business because I really love it, and you're my customer, and I love you best, kind of thing. And this is where this is where the transition with the owner comes in. So what the transition is they're going to teach you how to do the business, how to run the business. It's like, but they're not your employee. So you're a point of sale, system. They will show you how to enter the customer's credit card and complete the sale, but they won't be doing it. So that's one thing. Just keep in your head is that you're in charge, and you'll get this training, and you'll be able to call them, and they'll show up at various times, but you are doing it. They're not doing it under your watchful eye because they're not your employee. And then, of course, the key thing for the seller is making any seller note payments, because that, not making those will sour the relationship going forward.
Great. Seller's getting out, going to terminate the employees. They're going to start working for the new owner. We'll provide training and support. You are looking, seller, you're going to want to extricate yourself. You might have signed some leases or some other things where you have personal guarantees. You no longer own the business. You want to get yourself out of those. It's entirely possible that your deal indicates that accounts receivable come to you as the seller, because those are goods and services that you've already delivered. And so you need to set up a system and make sure those accounts receivable come to you and collect the seller notes. But really, it's a new owner, and they're in their business doing their thing. So I'm just a fast recap. We talked about that initial exploration. It can take years for a buyer or a seller to come to the point that they're ready. But something then happens. And then Okay, we're now ready to go. So we're going to listing and market prep. 2 weeks, 2 months, depends on the business, depends on how much time is available from all the people to participate. You get it out on the market. If you got a good business, if you priced it properly, if the current market environment is good, you could have those letters of intent showing up in 1 to 2 months. It's possible. If things are not going well, it could take longer. And to get to a purchase agreement and to closing, another 2 months. So I tell people 3 months, absolute minimum, 4 to 8 months is common. 12 months is not unusual. People should be ready for that kind of a timeline. And regardless of the business, the process is similar. Everybody's got to be committed. There are responsibilities to be taken care of throughout. Brokers are there to help you do the heavy lifting, but we've got to cross the T's and dot the I's. And you can see how these 9 steps are kind of universal. It can be frustrating. Stay calm, stay focused. We're all on the same team. And a saying that we like to use frequently: deals move at the speed of trust. Buyer, seller, broker, lender, attorneys, we all have to be trusting each other that we're working towards the same common goal. So that's what we've got.
So Don, we've got 2 questions in the chat.
Why don't you take them?
Why don't I do one? I'll do the first one, you do the second, or?
Okay.
So the first one, Andy, if you guys haven't seen it, he's asking, are there key things to look for to evaluate, elevate, an LOI above others where there's multiple LOI situation? Anything you see is a red flag. So it's fairly simple. The LOI that says, I'll pay you this, here's, I'm approved, so I've got the funding, here's the financial structure. The easiest one, of course, is I'm going to pay you cash, I'll write you a check, and my contingencies are, very limited. The red flags are, well, I'll give you this, but I want you to carry 200%. I expect, some unreasonable things. You have a long list of contingencies. Complexity is a red flag. And that's, I tell sellers that it's easier to get to agreement on the top line price than it is the structure of a deal. Because where you have multiple LOIs, you'll have, more creativity than you really want to see in an LOI. So simple, I'm solid, thought about it. Here's moving forward. And you've already interacted with the seller, so they will have gotten a notion of, okay, Don knows what he's doing. I feel good that he'll execute what he says.
Good. And I just will add to that. On the LOI, thoroughness is good. Dave says complexity is bad. I agree with him wholeheartedly. Be thorough. There are a number of things that should be in the LOI. Make sure those are in the LOI. But don't create an overly complex offer. Things that sellers are going to recoil from. They're going to recoil from any kind of performance-based. They don't know how you're going to run the business. They don't know what the future is. So being called on to put a significant amount of their selling price at risk, that is not going to be attractive, I think. And also, they probably have communicated what their interest is with a seller note. As a buyer, you may have needs that are greater than what the seller is looking for. But keep in mind, as a buyer, you're in competition with other buyers. So if your seller note requirement, for example, is too large, the seller's just going to have a hard time dealing with that if that's not where they want to go. So listen to the seller in those communications and try and structure a deal that pays attention to what the seller's thinking. Second question, Dave.
So the question is from Elisa. What's the appropriate percentage for the owner to carry in owner financing? Being facetious, the seller will say 0. But a lot of times, your lender will define it. They'll say, the SBA and your lender would really feel more comfortable if you get a 20%, a 10%. It's really a sort of a 5 to 20% is within, if you squint, within the reasonable side. 10% is probably right in the mid-range of where the bank will be comfortable, the SBA is comfortable, and so that's what I would tell you.
Any other questions in, Dave?
That's all. That's all our questions. Sorry.
Okay. Well, listen, we, as we always do, we ran 8 minutes long, so we apologize for keeping you a little bit extra. Hopefully it was a valuable program for you. We welcome hearing from you. We welcome your comments, positive or negative. We welcome hearing from you as buyers or sellers with additional questions. We will be happy to answer them. So you can see how to contact us up here. You'll get some additional information from the Larimer County SBDC. And here's what I'm going to leave you with. And thank you very much. We really appreciate your coming to the program today and appreciate the Larimer SBDC.
Thank you, guys.